Welcome and good morning to this, the 21st meeting in 2013 of the European External Relations Committee. We make the usual request for mobile phones to be switched off. And this morning can I welcome Patricia Ferguson and Aileen MacLeod, who are both substituting, and offer apologies from our colleague Roderick Campbell. Patricia, I believe you wish to declare any relevant interests or not? Patricia.
Convener, I don't believe I have any declarable interests, but I perhaps should just mention that I'm one of the Parliament's members of the Committee of the Regions, just for information as much as anything else.
Okay, thank you very much. And our first agenda item is a decision on taking business in private. And could I seek members' agreement to take items 4 and 5 in private? It's further discussions in the letter from the Cabinet Secretary.
Agreed.
Yep. Okay. Agenda item 2 this morning is a video conference with our MEPs, and we have 2 MEPs with us today. We're expecting another one, so if I can welcome Ian Hudghton, the MEP who's involved in Fisheries Committee in the European Parliament, and George Lyon MEP, who's the Vice Chair of the Budgets Committee and member of the Agricultural and Rural Development Committee. And I think we're expecting Catherine Stihler, who is European Parliament Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. Can I welcome both George and Ian to the Scottish Parliament's European Committee this morning? Can you hear us okay?
Clear. Loud and clear, yes, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. I think I know we have a very short time with you this morning, so we're just going to kick off straight into questions, if you don't mind. And the first question I've got is, President Barroso had said recently that he believed that Europe had fought back, and I'm just wondering, given that you're coming to the conclusion of your parliamentary term, whether you can maybe give us some insight into whether you agree with President Barroso that Europe has indeed fought back or is still fighting back.
I think there's a bit of a way to go, but perhaps signs of fight back taking some effect. But clearly there are considerable challenges yet for all European countries that we all still can contribute to the fight back, so to speak. And Catherine's just arrived, so I'll stop there. We'll just have the first question, Catherine.
Good morning, Catherine. Good morning.
Just to add to what Ian said, there is no two doubts that the euro crisis, while it's not gone away, it's stopped getting worse, which is as good as you can say. Mostly because of the intervention of the ECB when Mario Draghi offered to underwrite, or made a pledge to underwrite all debt around Europe in support of the currency, and that seemed to stem the markets, who at that time were getting to the stage where they wouldn't lend to Italy, which is the biggest potential defaulter, or the one with the biggest debt problems. Meanwhile, a lot of work's been going on to try and construct a banking union. There's been further work carried out to look at how you build greater political integration, because, as we've all discovered, a currency union where you've got no control at the centre of individual countries' spending and borrowing is a flawed instrument. It won't work, and that's why the euro got into such a mess. And it's interesting that's the model being proposed for a separate Scotland, but I've no doubt we can discuss that if we want to.
Okay, I think we're going to go straight into questions from colleagues in committee, and I think Hanzala Malik is up first.
Thank you and good morning. I'm sorry we have such wonderful technology because you've missed a fabulous sunny day in Scotland. But I would want to ask George Lyon, first of all, a question. It's about rural development, and that's your area of interest. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps tell us what you consider to be the key political policy issues for Scotland in the coming year, and in particular in terms of IT and what support you can lend us to roll out the IT programme in Scotland, because at the moment we're hemorrhaging in terms of the opportunity for trade in our rural areas?
I do the telecom stuff, so maybe I'm better to do that. We're working on the digital single market just now, Hansla, which is being discussed. My committee is an opinion-giving committee, but it's also got responsibility around the areas on consumer protection. So kind of the key areas on the digital single market debate. At the moment, you've got a very fragmented market, 28 member states. The potential for growth, if we can create a better single market in telecoms, is phenomenal. I think for every 2 jobs lost, 5 jobs are created in the telecom sector. I mean, and they also are saying in the next little while, there's, almost a million IT jobs going missing because we don't have the skill set across the European Union. These are kind of scary statistics. But the key issues in my committee are trying to end roaming charges, which, as many people in Scotland know, are just pure profit for the telecoms industry. It's around the issues of net neutrality, and I'd be really interested if the Scottish Parliament have views on net neutrality, because I think that's becoming a huge debate in the committee. It's issues around contracts for mobile phones. The Commission are proposing 6 months. In the UK, we have 24-month contracts, and sometimes people are given hidden charges within that. It's something we don't want to see. Also about spectrum policy. I know this is of interest in the Scottish Parliament as well, about better coordination of spectrum, and when that's rolled out and the money that brings to the revenue of governments, people don't want to lose that revenue, but there has to be better coordination. So huge issues. And the idea is that we end up having a deal on this before the Parliament goes into recess. This is very ambitious, but certainly there's being a political will to do this. So yesterday in my committee, we had an initial hearing, and the hope is that the lead committee, the industry committee, will come to a conclusion in this, and there will be a first reading deal, but it's very ambitious. So really keen to work with you. The digital single market is absolutely pivotal in terms of what you were talking before about the crisis and how we're getting out of the crisis in terms of job growth and creation. So really keen to work with you in any way we can to get the right tone in these reports.
Just to follow up.
Just to ask the specific question you put to me, which is on rural development. The legislation is now passed. The ball is now in the Scottish Government's court as to how they're going to implement the new rural development plan for Scotland. They have to take important decisions about how much money they're going to take from direct payments to rural development to top it up, to decide what the overall budget is. But clearly, they have the final decisions on how they're going to invest that money, where the priority areas are, and I guess we await the outcome of these discussions. The only final issue, I guess, is just to flag up that there's still delegated acts being considered here in European Parliament that implement the primary legislation. I don't think there's any nasties in that you need to worry about. I think we've got that one reasonably sorted out. So it's really over to the Scottish Government as to how they're going to implement that, and I hope that jobs and growth are at the focus of everything they do. That seems to me the big challenge.
Yeah, going back to Catherine, what you give me is good news. I'm just wondering what we in the Scottish Parliament can do to assist in trying to support the claim that I'm sure other European countries are also claiming in terms of rural areas and rolling out IT facilities for them. What can we do to support your case to ensure that we succeed in this bid?
Well, I think
in rolling out the programme sooner rather than later, and dealing with all the various charges that you've brought to my attention this morning.
Yeah, I mean, the digital single market is the big win if we can get that right. The digital single market is the big win if we can get it right. And at the moment, anything we can do to work together on this, I'm not hearing very much. We've had a UK government brief which is supportive of the principle of what's going on in the digital single market, but maybe not about the practical proposals made by the Commission. I'd be interested if there are different perspectives from yourselves. But this is a very quick process. I think we have to put down amendments in the very, very near future on some of these issues, and deadlines are very tight. But I think that on some of the issues around consumer protection, I think we would all be in agreement. We, want to end roaming, want to make sure consumers get a better deal and are not exploited. And some of the, the stories we hear, especially we had the consumer organisation Which give evidence yesterday, is, quite shocking. And data is becoming the big issue, and we need to ensure that people are not ripped off. So anything you can do to help us in that process would be really, really helpful. Very, 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 very welcome. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Willie Coffey, do you want to come in with your specific question?
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to you. I'm getting some confused messages, I think, from Europe. This morning in our Brussels Bulletin, it says here quite clearly that infrastructure investment is to be significantly bolstered, and that's to include some work in the digital single market. But in previous reports, we've been told that the IT infrastructure budget has been cut from 9 billion to 1 billion euros. And I'm just wondering, is that the case now that MAF has been agreed? And did you support that? And what impact do you think that cut from 9 billion to 1 billion is going to have for IT infrastructure projects in Scotland?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the digital infrastructure budget was reduced, and that was something that the Parliament fought hard to try and correct in the final deal. The good news is, of course, that in R&D and overall infrastructure spending through Connecting Europe has actually been increased, which is good news. And there's some big opportunities for Scotland within that. Electrification of the Glasgow-Edinburgh rail network is one of the projects that's listed on Connecting Europe. The new interconnector grid off the west coast of Scotland between us and Ireland is another one that's slated to receive funding from that if it goes ahead. Again, big opportunity to harness some of the potential renewable power off the coast of the west coast of Scotland. And of course, there's also money to do a study.
I'm talking about IT infrastructure investment, IT specifically, in support of the digital single market. My understanding is it's that budget that's been really seriously reduced. So
that's the final outcome.
Interested in that. So
what do you think? The final outcome.
Can I ask you, what do you think the impact of that's going to be, though, in Scotland in terms of IT infrastructure investment, particularly in rural parts of Scotland, the Highlands and Islands, the borders and so on?
Well, I'm not sure how much money is actually currently going in from Europe. I know the UK government have got a huge investment programme in the Highlands and Islands, and there's rollout right across the Highlands and Islands, and there are certainly a long way to go, but at least there is money there available to deliver on that. How much of that is European, I don't know. Maybe you could tell me.
Well, what I can tell you is, well, I'm hearing from yourselves that you've managed to slash the IT budget from 9 billion to 1 billion. I just don't see how that can advance IT infrastructure projects and the digital single market project at all. I'm wondering if you can help explain that.
Yeah. I think in fairness, I think I did hear George saying that the European Parliament was against that reduction. Yeah. And like everything else in European decision-making, decisions are made jointly by a majority in the European Parliament and a majority of member state governments. So what we do, even if we all agree on something, doesn't always happen because it has to be negotiated with the Council. So on broad terms, we do often try to do the best we can. For myself, I mean, my view has generally been not just on budgetary matters, but on a whole load of things, is that we should be taking decisions at European level on broad parameters and devolving as much of the decision making about, and when it comes to money, how to use budgets to member states and parts thereof for the time being as we can. And I think that now that we've got to the stage where the MFF has been agreed for future years, that we need to be now pressing from Scotland's point of view, currently via the UK, to make sure that maximum use is made of any funding that would help rural development through technical infrastructure, or indeed many other things. The UK government itself has been presented with some recommendations about how it's doing in terms of Europe 2020, and one of them is to reduce debt and deficit, but prioritise capital expenditure with high economic return. Now, I know that the Scottish Government is doing as much of that as it can do, but I think there's more that could be done there to generate economic growth.
Jamie McGregor.
Yes, thanks very much. A couple of questions on fisheries. Since the Scottish Fleet has done so much for conservation in the last 10 years, is it going to be faced with yet more compulsory conservation measures from the EU? And the other thing is that with the new situation regarding no discards, is there thought being put into what is going to happen to the fish that are no longer discarded?
How much time do you have? CFP reform, I think, is coming to us for a plenary vote in December, a couple of weeks from now, to seek the European Parliament's approval for the compromise package of CFP reform that has been agreed in the Council, and it was agreed yesterday in the Fisheries Committee too. So that likely will go ahead, but a significant part of that, from my point of view, was and remains decentralisation. And I think that now that we have the broad parameters agreed here in the form of a supposedly reformed CFP, that we need the member state governments to be pushing the boundaries of regionalisation to the maximum, because let's accept that the wording in the document is a little bit woolly in order to get the compromise. So I think there is considerable scope there for member states and fishing nations actually requesting to make use of the parts which say member states shall be empowered to do things. And that would, for me, include how to prepare for a discard ban, or elimination of discards, as I would prefer to call it, because it would be very easy to set a date upon which no discards will be allowed, and therefore all catches must be landed. But I think a realistic approach has to include preparation and investment in preparations which are designed to avoid unwanted catches in the first place, because there's no point in having a discard ban at sea if all we're going to end up is a problem on shore with unwanted catch or overquota or whatever. So it's a hugely complex area. Quota uplift has to be a part of it. Technical measures supported by the new Fisheries Fund has to be a part of it, and we need time in order to comply. But it is quite right to say that the measures that have been voluntarily led by Scotland up to now have shown signs of success, and therefore it seems to me that that kind of approach should be built upon, using expertise and techniques that we know will work because they're designed for particular fisheries.
I think, Jamie, you raise a very fundamental point, because with the best will in the world, a discard ban will mean that we end up landing the discards. We won't. I mean, in a mixed fishery, it's impossible to have completely no discards at all. And the challenge will be then, how do you deal with that, and how do you actually market it, and what value it has, and therefore what role government has in setting up the processes as to how to deal with that.
One last point. Thank you very much for those answers. But any further developments on the mackerel situation with Iceland and the Faroes, and for that matter, the herring as well?
Yeah, I was at a meeting with the West Nordic Council representatives. We have an interparliamentary meeting with them last week, and there was the last round of negotiations, I believe, and the Faroese were present to update us. The negotiations are ongoing. After I leave you today, I'm going to the Joint Parliamentary Committee with Iceland, so again this issue will be on the table. But as far as I know, the negotiations are ongoing, but there's still no resolution. Is that what your understanding is? But sorry?
Infraction proceedings.
Yeah, and the infraction proceedings on the Faroes as well. So I can keep you updated about what's happening. But at the moment, there was a kind of sense that there was hope, but there's still no resolution to this issue.
We had in camera yesterday in the Fisheries Committee the Commissioner being grilled for an hour and a half, mainly on that subject, and it is true to say that there is still considerable work to do in terms of finding an agreement, because the only way, and I think the Commissioner acknowledged it, the only way that a solution is going to be found is if an agreement is found around the table. So it seems that there are some hopes, in particular in relation to Iceland and mackerel, that it may be possible to get an agreement, but of course the question is at what cost? What will we have to give in order to get compromise on Iceland's part, because that's the only way that agreement can be found.
At the West Nordic Council meeting last week, there was a suggestion that they would very much like to visit Edinburgh. I don't know if there's a way that I could give you the details of the key organisers of that interparliamentary group, and perhaps there's something that your committee could do to talk to them as well. It's another route to these issues being raised, and I don't know if that would be helpful.
I think, Catherine, that would be extremely helpful, and I think the clerks will pick up that information and disseminate that to the committee, and we can work that out. Aileen MacLeod.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning, everyone. This committee has done a lot of very good work around the new €70 billion EU funding programme for research, the Horizon 2020, in terms of the benefits and opportunities that that programme can bring for our universities, our colleges, research institutes and SMEs in Scotland. And I just was really looking for an update this morning from you as to where that funding programme is, the Horizon 2020. And also in terms of when do you think the first call for proposals will be coming forward?
The legislation was voted through last week in Strasbourg, and the MFF budget was voted through, so the programme's now up and running and live, hopefully ready to come in on the 1st of January. And as I recall, there's actually some front loading of cash into the first 2014 budget year, because we passed the budget for it last week as well. And as part of that, we actually got an increase of about 200 million on the original proposal for R&D. As you rightly point out, the UK and Scotland in particular do very, very well out of the R&D budget. The total UK drawdown of the last FP7 programme was about 25% of the total budget line. There was some move to move away from the quality criteria that governs who gets the funding, to one of a quantitative approach, which might have seen the UK lose out, because of course we've got some of the best universities across Europe, and therefore they attract disproportionately higher levels of funding as a result of that. Thankfully that is not the case. It's based on qualitative measures rather than quantitative. So there is a bigger budget. It's front loaded for 2014. It's up to our universities and our research institutes to get the bids in as soon as the programme's opened and start drawing down that money.
Thanks very much, George. I really appreciate that answer. And obviously, one of the three pillars within the Horizon 2020 programme are the societal challenges, which included investment in health, demographic change and well-being. I think it's like €7.4 billion, and it's one of the largest investments of all the societal challenges. But actually related to that, Edinburgh University is currently leading an international consortium bid to establish a European Institute of Innovation and Technology, Knowledge and Innovation Community in the area of healthy living and active ageing, which, if successful, will be financed from the new EU Horizon 2020 funding programme. And that bid is being pursued through a Team Scotland approach with the support of the NHS 24, the newly established Digital Health Institute, Scotland Europa, Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government. And it's the only Scottish UK-led kick bid, which is called Life Kick. And obviously, to be successful, the kick bid will require backing from both the UK government and the Scottish government, as well as a number of the Scottish agencies. So it's just really just to flag that up to our MEPs and, maybe to ask, for any support that you could give towards that bid as well.
We're very happy to assist in any way possible. I visited one of the projects in Edinburgh, the Scottish Regenerative Medicine Centre, which did so well out of and it's just a fantastic research facility, leading edge research and lots of high paid jobs. So anything we can do to help make sure we secure that the right outcome there, we'd be very happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Claire Adamson.
Thank you. It's a bit of a supplementary to Eileen's question. Obviously, I was wondering if on reflection of your tenure and the proposals of Europe 2020 and actually the focus on SMEs and the opportunities that the projects like Horizon 2020 could bring to Scotland, if you get the impression that the Scottish institutes that support SMEs are gearing up for that change, and whether, when you're speaking to Scottish businesses, the SMEs also have an awareness of understanding of what the opportunities could be.
Yeah, well, certainly from my point of view, many of the small companies I visit, and indeed the university sector in particular, they're certainly well prepared for the increased funding that's coming this year. And well over the next 7 years. And certainly many of the companies in the small business sector are very aware too of the help and support they've had from European funding in the past. So clearly they need to make sure that they're focused on getting their bids for funding in at the right time. I mean, the money's there. It's up to them then to try and make sure they bid for it, and hopefully it delivers jobs and growth for Scotland, and which is so important given the current tough times we live in.
I think Scotland's got a pretty good record in terms of making maximum use of available European funding. We've got a lot of expertise not just in business, but in public bodies as well, that can help and has helped and will help to steer people towards available funding routes. Of course, we do have issues about match funding for some particular types of European project or European funding streams, but all in all we've done pretty well, which is not to say we couldn't do better if we had control of everything that is controlled by normal member countries of the European Union, but that might be a debate that we don't have time for today.
Yeah, I think that's a debate for another time, Ian. But on the issue, I think the issue that Aileen raised about the potential of Horizon 2020 and the good story we've got to tell, and then the issue you're raising, Claire, about what we can do. I mean, we are always saying think small first, and this is something where I think there's an element of what you say where we need more people to access funding and feel that that's a route for them to do things. Now, we got a breakdown of how I think Horizon 2020 been used previously, and yes, it's right, there's a lot of large organisations who have got capacity to do some of because the bids are very difficult, let's be honest about it. Putting a bid like that together is complex and can be difficult. But I think that there is potential for more opportunity for other organisations if we can tell this story and talk about the issues. I think Aileen's thing about ageing and stuff, that's absolutely right. This is the key issue, isn't it, for the whole of Europe, is how we deal with an ageing population and what we do. And some of the stuff in telemedicine as well is really fascinating, some of the projects on that. So I think your point is valid, and maybe something, I don't know what you're doing about talking to the small business organisations that maybe are coming to your committee, asking them what are the problems, and probably we can address some of that as well. I'd be very interested to listen to that and see how their experience has been and what we can do to improve the next programme. So thank you.
Okay, Patricia Ferguson.
Convener, good morning. I've wondered, given that 2014 is going to be such an exciting, interesting year for all of us, what you felt were the biggest challenges facing the European Union as we come to the end of this parliamentary session. But I think it would also be almost remiss not to mention in this week of all weeks and to ask you whether there's been any informal commentary from your colleagues about the publication of the White Paper this week.
Well, I'll start with the first one, challenges facing the EU. The challenges facing the EU are still to overcome the economic crisis and return Europe to growth and try and ensure that we repair the single currency to make it actually fit for purpose. And part of that is about how you centralise control in the Eurozone area over the individual countries' borrowing and spending, because at the heart of the problem has been that huge mistake that was made at the beginning, where you shared the single currency, but everyone then just went off and used the low interest rate to borrow and spend as much as they like, and then the crisis enveloped us. So that closer political integration is at the heart of trying to resolve the Eurozone crisis and return all these countries that are in the debt recovery programmes back to normality, and hopefully see growth return across Europe and do well. I mean, the biggest challenge we will face, I think, if the decision is to leave the United Kingdom, is to renegotiate our way back into the European Union. That's fundamental. Most of the comments here from colleagues I have, both across other member states, is that it's a pretty challenging list of demands that the SNP government have. Opt-outs on all the various main issues that we know the UK already has, plus another £2 billion in spending on CAP and rural development. And I don't think any member state thinks that that's going to be an easy or quick negotiation, given that how high the demands are and how really challenging the demands are in terms of the negotiations. So it's going to be a long, difficult process, I think, in terms of the renegotiation. And of course, there are huge sensitivities around Europe to this whole issue. There are many, many other member states who each of them have the right of veto, regardless of whether it's Article 48 or 49 you use. You can use, which I think it'll probably be Article 49, but regardless of which one you claim is the right one to use, every member state has a veto. Every member state will have to pass it through their own parliament. And that's the reality of the challenge that we will face. An interesting time.
Fascinating time indeed, and of course it's negotiation from within, because when we vote yes in the referendum, for the 18 months thereafter or so, we'll still be part of the UK while negotiating the settlement of that, and therefore we'll still be part of the European Union, and in parallel and along with the UK government, who have signed to say that they will accept the outcome of the referendum, we can be and will be negotiating here in Brussels on the details that require, and we've always recognised will be required, because Scotland will have to be named in the treaty. That is a treaty change, but it doesn't seem to me to be momentous or difficult. We'll have to have a specified number of MEPs, but there's a formula for that. It doesn't seem to me to be momentous or difficult. So negotiation from within, and with the Edinburgh Agreement fully implemented, i.e. the outcome respected by both governments in the UK, that makes this situation unique, and that means that governments and the EU as a whole will accept the outcome too. I'm quite certain about that. So I think that the 18-month timescale that's been set out and the route that's been set out is perfectly realistic, and will recognise a democratic expression of will in an ultra-democratic format that this referendum is.
Thank you, Patricia, for your question. On the first part, I think that it's jobs, 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 it's cost of living, it's about an alternative to austerity across the EU. The Socialist Group has been has this Relaunching Europe campaign that we've been doing. Obviously, youth unemployment across the EU. I mean, in some parts of the EU, it's over 50%. This is completely unacceptable. We can't have a lost decade of jobs and a lost decade for our young people as well. So I think that's one of the pivotal issues next year. I think many people feel we've lost the social dimension in Europe. You can't have the single market without the social dimension. That's one of the great benefits. I think that we have to get back to that balancing. And at the moment, people feel that relaunching Europe, I think, is the way forward. On the question of the independence white paper and then yesterday's paper on Scotland and Europe, I've tried my best to read both. I think that, I went to the committee, the Economic Committee, where Commissioner Almunia was speaking. When I asked him the question on about Article 48 and about the issue that was laid out that you can have exemptions on the euro, on Schengen, his advice to the Scottish people was to vote no. That's on record, and now we've seen what the Spanish Prime Minister said. When you look at Article 48, if that's the basis you want to negotiate, and I have to say I'm pleased that after pursuing the Scottish Government for 2.5 years on the question, that at last we have the fact that it is a negotiation, you will require a treaty change, and even under Article 48, as George has said, you will need unanimity. And the Spanish Prime Minister has made that very clear, that he is not so keen on this whole issue. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's a negotiation. The advice from Commissioner Mooney is to vote no. It'll be up to the Scottish people to decide how they will vote in the referendum. But if you look at that 18-month negotiation, how you can possibly succeed in doing that, in that timescale. And I know in the paper it's talked about Austria, it's talked about Sweden, it talks about Norway. And remember, Norway decided not to join. It says 13 months, that was a different time. And also, to put German reunification into the paper is just a non-starter. I think you have to look at the entirety. It's a negotiation. You cannot predict what that negotiation will bring. And yes, you can have a wish list, but at the end of the day, I think that my preference is to remain as part of the United Kingdom, and within that being part, as a large member state, of part of the EU. And the way to succeed in doing that is having a Labour government at Holyrood, a Labour government in Westminster, and for me, sister socialist parties elected across the EU. But that's what you would expect from a Labour politician. But anyway, thank you for the question. And I will. One of the things I wanted to just touch upon when it comes to next year is it's a real pity that next year we can't do something in the European Parliament on, say, the Commonwealth Games. And I don't know if that's something we could do before we finish, to do something as a Team Scotland approach on the Commonwealth Games. Yesterday we saw something on the Paralympics, wasn't it? They had an exhibition. And I just feel sometimes we're missing some of the things that we can put party politics aside. The Commonwealth Games is a great thing coming to Scotland, and we need to make sure that we celebrate that. So I don't know if there's something we can do, putting party politics in our positions on the referendum aside. There's something we could do before we finish as the team of MEPs.
I think the context of the Spanish Prime Minister's remarks have to be read, bearing in mind that he's running his own project, FEAR, big style, at the moment. And the points about German reunification and other examples mean that and illustrate that the EU is very, very good, very adept at fixing things which arise due to democratic changes within or around the member states. And I'm quite certain that a democratic expression in a referendum in Scotland will result in a smooth transition as outlined in the White Paper.
Yeah, just to finalise on that, I think.
Sorry, I have to go, George, to the GP.
Yeah.
I have to go to the JPC on Iceland. I'm speaking on economic matters in Iceland, so please, I'm so sorry I have to leave. But thank you very much for your questions, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. So thank you.
Thank you. I think a very, very quick supplementary, Jamie, because I know that Ian and
I really
George
just
do
wanted
have
to know,
other meetings
bearing
to
in mind the drop in the broadband budget, what are the tangible and practical benefits of being in a transitional region for the Highlands and Islands?
I think, Jamie, we're up to the Scottish Government to decide what the priorities are for investment using that budget, and I don't think on the REGI legislation it's excluded that money could be used for investing in improving broadband or ICT in the Highlands. So it will be up to the Scottish Government to decide how the money is spent.
Okay, very, very quickly, Hans Aller.
I just want to come back to that point. I mean, it's well saying that the Scottish Government will find its own resource to spend on this area. I think that's a big ask, considering that the funding from the European Union has been slashed in the way it has. And I really have to press this point home to you colleagues in the European Union to say you really need to think out of the box and advise us on how we can encourage additional resources, because it is an urgent matter. We really need this the resource to roll out the IT systems out there. Our students are suffering with lack of communication, our businesses are suffering, and just the quality of life is suffering. And I think we need to do something more than just say, well, a decision was made in the European Union, we've got to live with it. I'm sorry, I'm looking for you to come up with some solutions. So could you please work with us to see how we can assist each other and find those solutions?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. As I said, the budgets are now set. The Scottish Government will have flexibility just as to how they spend the European regional funds, structural funds in the Highlands and Islands and other areas of Scotland. and it'll be up to them to prioritise how that money's spent, how the European money's spent, which therefore gives you some opportunity to at least target it as to where the greatest need is. And certainly we were disappointed as a Parliament that that budget was reduced. And if you actually look at the negotiation, what happened was that the digital budget was reduced and the CAP budget increased during the negotiations back in February. That's where the money went to.
All I'm asking is we really need to reach out there. Okay, yes, I accept the fact that a budget's been set, but there are always fringe budgets. There are other projects, there are other avenues, and I'm just saying we really need to search and dig deep to try and explore those possibilities. And we are willing to do that, and all I'm saying is that we need you on board to assist us in that process.
I think you have agreement on that we can do what we can.
I know that you have to rush off, and we've managed to squeeze 10 minutes more out of you than we anticipated, and we really appreciate that. But thank you very much for coming to committee this morning, be it over our great technology, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And from this committee, I think we wish you all well, and whatever happens with you in 2014 and your attempts to be re-elected. Thanks very much. Okay, and we're moving on to agenda item 3, which is a Brussels Bulletin. You've got it in your papers. It looks pretty hefty this week, but it has got some additional papers at the back, which we felt would just enhance some of the work that we've done, answer some of the questions that we have asked on trafficking. So we have the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly's report on that, and we also have the report on, to find it, the Irish Presidency and the Council of the European Union. So these are attached to the back of the Brussels Bulletin. I wonder if, Willie, I know that you're a member of the British Irish Parliamentary Association, if you've got anything to add to the reports that are attached to the Brussels Bulletin?
Okay, thanks very much, Convener. Yes, I do attend the Assembly. One of the pieces of work reported on, of course, in there was an examination of the Irish Presidency over the first 6 months of 2013, and it has to be noted that Ireland has considerable experience here in doing this kind of work, and I think to their great credit, even with a budget of 50% of what it would usually be, Ireland managed to convene over 2,500 meetings during their term there, and I think it's to their great credit that they did that. I got the opportunity, Convener, to ask Pascal Donohoe, who's the Irish Minister for European Affairs, the same question that I asked our European MEP colleagues there about the IT infrastructure budget, and his view was that the cut in IT infrastructure would quite likely have to be taken up by the private sector. So I'm not entirely comfortable that our members of the European Parliament are fully aware of the impact and what the impact of this could be, and expecting that the private sector will step in to bridge that kind of gap there. And I think, unfortunately, Catherine Stihler, I think it was, she didn't get a chance to answer my question. The other two colleagues did. So, in moving from that, Convener, to the point that's made in the bulletin, I'm really confused about the picture we're getting here. If I can refer you to page 2 there, it says infrastructure investment is to be significantly bolstered in Europe, and that includes Europe's digital single market. I think we're all over the place with this. On the one hand, we're getting a £9 billion to £1 billion reported reduction, but now we're being told the funds are being bolstered. I think I would, through yourself, Convener, request that we get some kind of clarity on what the MAF agreement is, the budget agreement is, for things like IT infrastructure, because it has quite an impact on countries like Scotland and throughout Europe in terms of how we can take forward the whole digital agenda. So with that, I know we've raised this several times, Convener, at the meeting, but I think we need some kind of clarity on where we're going with this in Europe.
Can I come back on that as well? And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. I think we're looking for clarity. One of the things that I'm now thinking, that there's a possibility, and this is just my own personal view, is that the possibility is that perhaps when they talk about bolstering the resource, is perhaps for rural areas. And if that's the case, then we want to tap into that. So you're right, we need clarity. We need to know exactly when the resource that's left, how and where that's supposed to be spent. And if it is for rural areas, then we're up for it, and we should be up there bidding for our share to ensure that we get the programme rolled out.
I think, yeah, both very, very valid points. And Willie, on your point, I think it's maybe worthwhile as asking Scotland Europa for some, you know, a briefing on a clarity around that. I mean, I'm getting the feeling, because it keeps coming back to committee, that, you know, we maybe want to do a bit of work on it in the near future. The other point is that the Infrastructure Committee, I think we should raise it with the Infrastructure Committee, given it is their patch anyway, but to make sure that we're not doing any work that they're already doing, and maybe they'll have some additional information that we can use. So happy to take that course of action. Yeah.
Remember, Convener, just to stress that it's IT infrastructure. I mean, I asked the question, but I think Mr Lyon may have picked me up incorrectly. It's not about the broader infrastructure, it's about IT infrastructure, it's about broadband and connectivity and all of those kinds of issues. I just don't get the sense from our European colleagues that they're really fully aware of what the impact of this might be.
Tricia?
I think the problem is that two things are being conflated. I think what George Lyon was talking about is what's mentioned here, which is the bolstering of the overall infrastructure budget, and not within that, obviously, there is a reduced IT, if you like, budget or broadband budget. But I think Willie and Hans are absolutely right. I think what we need to know is what money is actually available and what it's available for and where it's available to. So it would be really interesting to get all of that, because otherwise we're just talking at cross purposes.
Yep. Yeah, I think we should seek further clarity, and I do know that we'll be definitely looking at this again in the future. So let's see if we can get some clarity around about the points raised today, and then we can make a decision as a committee where we want to go with that. Then, Jamie.
I'd like to try and get a bit more clarity on the actual tangible and practical benefits of a transitional region, because it seems to me that, you know, if you take broadband, for example, the area that is a transitional region is the area that's suffering most from lack of broadband, and that's something that I would like to find out. So I don't know how. I mean, can I get some information from the research here, or?
I think we can, and we can also get some information from the Scottish Government on how that is being rolled out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really understand the difference between an ordinary region and a transitional one, other than one is meant to get more money.
Okay.
And the other one was going to get it.
Well, I think there's a huge amount of clarity around about all of these points, and Katie's taken note of them all, so we'll get that clarity back to you. Any other questions on the... Claire Adamson.
Main point being, I'm really glad that multi-financial framework has now been agreed, and it looks as if some of the ambitions and projects will be going ahead. On page 2 of the Brussels Bulletin, there was just two things I wanted to particularly raise at committee, and that was I was really glad to see that 15 billion, or 40% higher than the equivalent programmes under current funding, has been allocated for Erasmus. And I think that's really, really important, because what our experience in Scotland is that while we have many students visiting this country and we're very proud record of welcoming them, and I think the British Council's recent report on the perception of visiting students to Scotland is very, very, very good from our higher institutions, we also have to encourage that outward look from our own students, and make sure that our own students are taking full advantage of the offers that Erasmus has. And also the Creative Europe budget, which I noticed received a 9% boost. And I raised that committee because the Education and Culture Committee, which I also sit on, took evidence this week on the creative industries, and the film industry in particular had quite a bit of discussion, and it was noted that other areas of the UK, like Northern Ireland and Yorkshire, had been able to secure European structural funding for their film industry, but it was something that had not happened in Scotland previously, but something that both Creative Scotland and the representatives of the film industry were interested in looking at. And I know my colleague Gonzalo is always looking at why we're not accessing all areas of European funding, so I thought that was quite an interesting thing to have been raised at that committee.
Any more comments in the Brussels Bulletin?
Just one.
Aileen.
Thanks very much, Convener. Yeah, I was just a comment around on obviously the negotiations that have been reached on the Common Agricultural Policy, I know the new cap is due to start in 2015, but just generally just to sort of say, how kind of disappointed, as to what's happened, with the cap convergence uplift of £223 million, which, has only come to the UK because of Scotland's historically low level of payments per hectare, and that's now been lost because of the way the UK did the negotiations.
Okay, thanks for that. Hans Ala and then Jamie.
It was about trafficking, and I was wondering whether we could get a hold of a report from the Olympics Committee in terms of before and after, so to see if there's any lessons that we can learn from those as a committee. I'm sure it's just a matter of making a request.
Yeah, Katie's just whispering in my ear that we had written to the Scottish Government about their plans for the Commonwealth Games, and that I know that's predicated on the lessons learned from the Olympic Games. So if we can maybe, try and chase that up,
yes.
And then take that point from there. Yep. Yeah, happy to do that. Jamie.
Well, I just noticed that the thing about SME access to finance, where it just says that the report on access to finance shows that 1 out of 3 European SMEs did not get the full finance they needed. Is that mean to say that what they should have actually got, or is it what they need? I think I don't quite understand what that means, because it looks to me like a big failure. I mean, if you remember that conference we had on the 2020 thing, and we had a lot of SMEs talking in there, and it doesn't appear, is this money they should be getting which they're not getting, or is it just what they need? I mean, I don't understand that.
I'm not sure, Jamie. I know...
It doesn't really make it clear.
I think it's just the facts of SMEs feeding back saying they had applied for funding and not got it. I don't know the detail of that. It's maybe something we can pick up with Scotland Europa and ask for a bit more detail on. Yeah. I think we should tie it with one of the questions that I wanted, which wasn't in here, and tie it in with the progress of the Banking Regulation Union that has been discussed right now across Europe to regulate banks, but also the fact I think it failed to get support in the House of Lords this week as well. So I think it's all tied into the same point of how we regulate banks, but how we make sure that businesses get the finance they need to generate the economic growth that we all need. I think in that context that would be quite helpful. Patricia.
I agree with Jamie. I don't think that actually makes sense, that paragraph, because it doesn't tell us, or at least it's not as instructive as it could be, because it doesn't tell us where this money was meant to be coming from, and is this money they were hoping to get from local banks, or was it through the EU? But I also noted in connection with that the COSME programme is going to be increased, or rather will provide £2.3 billion to SMEs to support competitiveness and to boost jobs and growth. So it might be interesting to link those two things together, getting clarification of what the issue is for SMEs at the moment as identified on page 1, but also finding out exactly what the new programme is going to do for SMEs and how Scottish SMEs might be able to benefit from that.
It's a worthwhile piece of work there. Is there any other comments in the Brussels Bulletin? There's only one final thing that I wanted to mention that's not in the Brussels Bulletin, but it's actually very, very topical, is that I noticed David Cameron speaking yesterday about some sort of a renegotiation on the free movement of workers, which I think is an extremely dangerous line to go down. Actually, I think is quite worrying, and it comes in the back of the supposed subsidiarity issue that we had with the directive recently on free movement of workers, and it just seems there's a bit of a theme developing here, which worries me no end, and it worries me no end because some workers that I have in my local area have contacted me this week to say that they're extremely concerned. Does this mean that they will not be allowed to work in Scotland any longer? Will they lose their job? So I think there's a huge issue here, and I think as a committee it would be remiss of this committee not to look into that, to see the impact of what David Cameron is proposing and the impact that then has on workers in Scotland. I don't know how members feel about that, but it was just yesterday and the day before I was picking up some of the reports on this one.
Surely that's a devolved matter. I mean, how would we be able to impact on that? I don't understand what remit we would have, how we would overturn what central government decided. I mean,
you mean it's a reserved matter?
Yeah.
Rather than a devolved matter.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a reserved matter. No, you're absolutely right. But it does have an impact on Scottish business. If there's any uncertainty about whether a worker's got a right to work.
I'm not sure if that's the case, but I'm quite happy for somebody to do a study on it. I mean, I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm just simply thinking the time scales that we have and the business that we already have, whether we really want to go down this route right now. Can we, maybe I'll suggest that we wait and see how it pans out, because at the moment it's a very early stage and it might not actually happen. They may not have the time to actually change legislation, and therefore we'd be chasing a ghost, I think. I would suggest that perhaps we just wait and see what legislation is brought forward before we start thinking how that's going to impact us.
The way I'm reading it, it looks like David Cameron's going to go to formal council on this in the very, very near future. So that's obviously it makes it, pretty urgent. I'm not suggesting the committee do a huge piece of work on it, but I would maybe like Scotland Europa to look at what's being proposed and the possible impacts of that. I think that would be very, very important. Claire.
Yeah, Convener, I would just like to say I absolutely hear what you're saying about the uncertainty issues, and it's confounded, I think, by what David Cameron has actually said about his position about renegotiating the UK's position in Europe and the uncertainty around that, when he specifically said he wasn't going to let us know what the renegotiation terms would be. So it's a very, very uncertain area, and I can understand that now that is impacting on workers in Scotland.
With all due respect, Chair, nothing is impacting on us at all at the moment, because there is no legislation to do it. It's only if there is legislation, there may be an impact, and I would suggest that we still give it time to let it pan out. It's not clear just now. There's no clarity whatsoever. I don't think David Cameron has the time to pass legislation. Without passing legislation, there's nothing in the air just now. There is no programme, there is no... I don't know. Okay. I would suggest we err on caution and just wait another couple of meetings.
Patricia, did you have thoughts?
I think I would like to be a bit clearer about what he's actually saying and what remit he has, for his views. So it may be that we should come back to it early in the new year, our first meeting in the new year, once we've maybe got some background information for it, and then make a call then. Funnily enough, I'd been going to highlight the point in the Brussels Bulletin about the changes that they propose to make to seasonal workers, and the fact that that will actually be very, very helpful to people, and interestingly, it's seasonal workers from out with the EU. So I'm not too sure what David Cameron's view of all of that will be, so that will be an interesting one to watch. But I think it is something we should come back to, but I would like to get a bit more information about it before we decided to go down a particular route with it, I think. But I just wanted to say as well that I think one that we maybe want to flag up to the climate and whatever committee it is that looks at climate and energy policy, the fact that there is going to be a vote in plenary on the 9th of January with some quite, to my mind, unhelpful proposals coming forward from some within the Parliament, and I think it's one that we really need to watch.
I agree, and my proposal actually on the free movement of workers thing was to seek the information so that we can then come to some sort of a judgment or not on this committee. So Scotland Europa, I think, would be our first port of call, and because it's a Brussels Bulletin discussion, we can use them to find out some of that information. I think your point about raising the specific issues raised in the Brussels Bulletin with other committees, we always send the Brussels Bulletin to all other committees anyway. We agree to do that, but in some circumstances we actually write directly to committees when there's been a specific point raised, and we will endeavour to do that. People happy to move on from the Brussels Bulletin? Yeah, happy to send it to other committees and follow up with the suggestion that Patricia made. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very, very much. And I will now suspend this committee while we move into private session, and can I thank all the members of the public for coming along today.